Okay, so we're on to the second phase of marking, and try and remember to use a colour pen that I am going to be able to see stands out, or you are going to be able to see stands out. And it's a good idea to have a highlighter as well, ideally. And remember, it's always a great idea to write in the correct answer if you got it wrong. Okay, so let's get on without further ado. Thanks, Doug. Okay, so we're going to start then with question 5, which was about SC 19 to 21. So it's basically the stuff on smoking, and it's worth a big old whopping 19 marks, this question, and that's because there's a graph in it. So let's get on. Okay, so question 5, match up the chemical to the problem it causes. So there's nicotine, tar, carbon monoxide and hot smoke particles, which are all obviously in cigarettes. So this question's on cigarettes. So nicotine, if we have a look through, it is what causes addiction and raises blood pressure. So we're going to go down to the second one here. So nicotine goes down to the second one. Tar is what causes lung cancer. So we're going to go down to the last one here. You don't have to have used a ruler, by the way, but makes it nice and neat. And then carbon monoxide causes red blood cells to absorb it instead of oxygen, which is why it's particularly bad if you're pregnant. And then hot smoke particles is the only one left, and they cause an overproduction of mucus. So that's how your lines should go. So 5A is worth 4 marks. You get 1 for each correct line. Obviously, if you get one wrong, then you'd get 3 marks. Get 2 wrong, you get 2 marks, and so on. Please don't go past here unless you have marked question 5A. Okay, so 5B. After years of research, Richard Dole and his team proved that smoking is directly linked with lung cancer. Here are his results. So I'm going to make sure I read through the table properly and understand it. So he's got number of deaths per 100,000 people per year. And then he's got 5 categories. He's got people who've never smoked. So only 11 people out of 100,000 will die each year if they've never smoked. So not many people get lung cancer if they haven't smoked. If they used to smoke, 85. So it's still fairly low for used to smoke. If you smoke 1 to 14 a day, there's 145 people will die per 100,000 per year. If you smoke 15 to 24, it goes up to 250. And if you smoke 25 plus per day, it's 420 people will die per year out of 100,000 people. So you can see that it goes up the more you smoke. Right, so now that we've looked at the question properly, we need to now draw a bar chart of the results. So it tells us that it's a bar chart, not a line graph. Okay, so when you are drawing a graph, you must use a ruler and you must use a pencil. And that pencil needs to be a sharp pencil, please, boys. All right. So let's have a look at how you should have drawn the graph. All right, so I am going to start by deciding how wide my bars are going to be. I've got 5 bars. So if I do it 4 bars wide, yep, that fits perfectly. So I'm going to make each bar 4 bars wide. Now, if you didn't do yours 4 bars wide, that's absolutely fine, but they need to be, each bar needs to be the same width, okay? Each bar needs to be the same width. All right, and then I need to label these. So lifelong non-smoker, former smoker. In fact, I'm going to put this on a time lapse while I draw this. Okay, so let's have a look at where the marks are then, okay? So you need to be very careful about giving yourself a mark for each of these things. So only give yourself the mark if you did this. So your first mark is for having each of your bars the same width, okay? So that's worth 1 mark. Now they don't have to be 4 squares. They could be 2 squares, they could be 3 squares. They couldn't be more than 4, obviously. 1 is too narrow, but either 2, 3 or 4 squares wide is fine. So 1 mark for the width. So give yourself, just put a little 1 to show that you've got that mark, okay, and tally them up. Right, your second mark is for labelling each of these. Now you have to have written the full label. So if you just put like smoker, that wouldn't be enough. You have to put, for example, smoker 1 to 14 per day. It needs to be exactly the same as what's written in the table above, okay? So your second mark is for those labels. All right, so give yourself a second mark if you labelled these. Your third mark is for labelling categories of smoker onto here. So if you just wrote categories, or if you just wrote smoker, that's not enough. You didn't get the mark. You have to have written categories of smoker, because you're literally copying what it says above. You literally copy what it says in here down to there, okay? So don't try and make stuff up, just copy from the table. Okay, so that's 3 marks so far. Your next mark is for doing a sensible scale up here. So it needs to be the 50 times table. So you need to have gone up in 50s, or let's maybe say that you didn't bother writing the 50 and you went up in hundreds, okay? But essentially you'll know you're right if you started at 0 and you ended at 500. If that's what you did, if you started at 0 and ended at 500, then you get a mark for your scale, okay? Well, that's mark 4, isn't it? You would still get the mark. Let's say you didn't bother writing past 450 because you knew that there wasn't anything past 450, that's fine. But if you would have ended at 500, then you've got the mark. If you use any other scale, then that isn't the perfect scale choice and you don't get the mark. It might still be fine to get marks for the rest of the graph, but it's not the perfect scale choice. Okay, your next mark is to do with the scale still. Sometimes people just write the numbers and they don't draw on the little lines. See these little lines here that go to the numbers? If you've drawn on the little lines, you get a 5th mark, okay? Because they're showing this is where 50 is, this is where 100 is, all right? Okay, your 6th mark is for this label here, and it needs to say number of deaths per 100,000 people per year. It can't just say something shorter than that. You have to, again, you're copying it exactly from the table here into here, all right? So that's your 6th mark. Oops. All right, and then there's only 4 marks available for the bars, so that's because it should be quite easy to draw these bars. So basically you need all 5 bars drawn correctly to get 4 marks, and then each one you've done incorrectly, you would take off a mark, all right? So let's say you'd done 1 wrong, you'd take off 1 mark. If you've got all 5 right, you only give yourself 4 marks. So there are 4 available marks for the bars. So let's go through the bars and check that you've done them correctly. So the first bar should be just above the line, okay? Just above the line. Your second bar, if you count 1, 2, 3, it should be just above the 3rd line. So count 1, 2, 3. Have you drawn it just above the third line? Okay, your third bar, you're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it should be just below the 6th bar line. Okay, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it should be just below that 6th one. Your fourth bar, it should be on exactly the 250, so that's easy. You can use your ruler to check that it's on exactly the 250. All right. And then your last one, you're actually going to count down from the top this time. 1, 2, 3, and it should be somewhere just below that one. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, somewhere just below. All right. So if you followed me properly there, it should have been quite easy to see whether your line was in the right place for your bar at the top of your bar. Okay, so if you need to go back and listen to how many you're meant to be counting, do it again. Okay, now you can give yourself 4 marks, remember, if you did all 4 correct. If you got each one you got wrong, you would take away a mark. I also wanted you to take away a mark if you did any of the following. If you didn't use a ruler, particularly to draw the top here, okay? If you didn't use a ruler to draw the top, you're going to take all of your marks away, okay? If you didn't use a ruler for the top, take all of your marks away. If you coloured it in and you went over the top like that, you're going to take 1 mark away for each bar that you did that on. 1 mark away for each bar that you did that on. If you coloured in pen or in highlighter or in anything other than pencil, you're going to take a mark away. And I think that's it. So add up your marks out of 10. When you're done marking your graph, I would actually like to see a photo of this. So what I'd like you to do is take a picture on the iPad or whatever you're working on, and then upload it to Shobi into today's lesson. So it will be called Review 2 or Exam Review 2, something like that. And you can just upload it straight into there, please, so that I can just double check your graphs, because I know it's quite difficult to mark your own graph, okay? All right, so now that we've produced our graph, the point of doing the graph in science is so that you can look at it and analyse it and work out what it's telling you. So what we're going to do now then is we're going to answer the questions on the reverse. So I'm going to use 2 separate ones so that I can show you both at the same time and flick between them easily. So let's have a look at the question then. So this is still part of 5B. It says refer to the data on the graph for all these answers. So it's really important that each time that we answer something, we are looking back at our graph and using that as evidence. So why did they have a group of lifelong non-smokers? So why did they bother having this group here, this group here? So this is what we call a deduction question. So you have to think for yourself and work it out. Well, it's what we call a control group. So they were the control group, which you use for a comparison. So the keywords that I'm looking for, and you can have either of these keywords will get you the mark, is either if you put that they're the control group or if you put that they're used for comparison. So a control group is there because if we didn't have these non-smokers, we wouldn't be able to say that smoking actually causes lung cancer, because if we don't know how many people would get it normally without smoking, then we can't say that this is definitely due to smoking. So a control group is there to compare your results back to. So that's why comparison or compare is the keyword and control is the keyword. So if you wrote anything to say that we needed something to compare our smokers to, we needed a control group, anything with those two words in will get you the mark, okay? All right, why did they divide people into groups depending on how many cigarettes they smoked a day? So why didn't they just have 2 bars, non-smokers and smokers? Why didn't they just do smokers, non-smokers and smokers? And again, this is a deduction question. So you have to work, sorry, I just knocked my tripod. You have to work it out. It's not something that you will have been taught, although I did actually teach you this when we did the graph ourselves in the topic. And it's because if you only had 2 groups, you wouldn't be able to tell whether how many cigarettes you smoke affects your likelihood of getting lung cancer. Okay, so if you didn't have groups, you wouldn't be able to tell if the number or how many of cigarettes you smoke affects your chances of getting lung cancer. So again, you don't have to have said exactly what I said. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for the understanding that without knowing the number of cigarettes they smoke a day, you can't make the link about whether it affects your chances. So it's all about making that link between, does the number of cigarettes affect your chances? So you could have said it in the opposite way. Rather than if you didn't have groups, you could say by having groups, it shows you whether the number of cigarettes you smoke a day affects your chances of getting lung cancer. Because obviously it's useful to know that, well, if I smoke, say, only 1 a day, is that going to have the same effect as if I smoke 100 a day, or is it going to have a really different effect? So it's useful for people to know that. It's useful for doctors to know that as well. Okay, so that's where your mark is there. It's for making that link between the number and telling you whether it affects your chances. So the next question then, IV, does it make any difference how many cigarettes you smoke per day on your chances of getting lung cancer? So does it have any effect? Well, we need to look at our graph, of course. So if we look here, we can see, so these are people who used to smoke. This is people who smoke 1 to 14 per day, 15 to 24 per day, and 25 per day. And we can see very clearly that the more you smoke, the likelier you are to get lung cancer. So 420 people out of 100,000 will get it if they smoke 25 plus, whereas only 145 if they're 1 to 14 per day. All right, so yes, it does. The more you smoke per day, the more likely you are to get lung cancer. So you can't just say yes, you have to, so yes, the mark is for saying yes, but you need to explain that the more you smoke a day, the more likely you are to get lung cancer, okay? So you need to have made that connection for the mark, that the more you smoke, the more likely you are to get lung cancer, all right? Why did they test such large groups of 100,000 people? That is simply to make it, and there's no other word that I'm looking for, to make your results reliable, okay? So I would like it in a sentence rather than one word, but the word I'm looking for is reliable. If you test less than that, then it's not going to be a reliable result, okay? Is there any point in giving up smoking? Give evidence for your answer. So again, we need to go to the graph. Well, let's look at our former smokers. So people who used to smoke, is their chance less of getting lung cancer, basically? Well, yes, it is. It's not back down to a lifetime non-smoker, but it is lower than people who are still smoking. So yes, because you have less chance of getting lung cancer. So where are your marks coming from? They're coming from saying yes. They're coming from saying there is less chance of getting lung cancer. So you don't have to use the word less. You could use any word that means less. So you could have said you have a decreased chance of getting lung cancer. You're not as likely to get lung cancer. Your chances of getting lung cancer will be lower than if you smoke. Anything that means that is fine, okay? And that is the end of question 5. So what you need to do now is, remember, you need to go through and add up all of your marks. If you didn't get it, you cross through it, you circle it if you got it right. Add up all of your marks for question 5, and then you need to put them into here. So let's say I got 11 marks, I would put it in like that, okay? Please do not move on unless you have added up your marks for question 5. Okay, so moving on to question 6, which is covering SC 23 and 24. It's only worth 5 marks. Okay, so 6A, the heart and the lungs are both soft organs that lay under the rib cage. Explain the role of the rib cage in relation to these two organs. So what's the job of the rib cage? So the rib cage protects these two soft organs. The rib cage protects these two soft organs, and the key word I'm looking for is protects. If you put a synonym of that, which is a word that means the same, then you can have the mark, but you need the fact that it's protecting the organs, okay? That's your first mark for question 6A. Please do not move on unless you have marked question 6A. Now moving on to 6B, where the instruction seems to have fallen off the top of the paper. So I'm hoping that everyone worked out, it should be quite simple, that you're adding these labels on. So the instruction for 6B just said label the diagram. So we have the skull, should be nice and easy. Each is worth 1 mark, obviously. We have the rib cage, which you were told about on the page before, so should have been easy. We have the femur, which is the large bone of the leg, and we have the pelvis. So those are your 4 labels. There are no other alternatives. Those are the only 4 words that you can use. And that is question 6 completed. So you need to add up your marks as ever and put them onto the front page. Please do not move on unless you have marked and added up all of the marks for question 6 and added them onto the front page. Okay, moving on to question 7, where we're covering FC 25 and 20 to 27, and it's only worth 8 marks, this question. Okay, so starting with question 7A, which type of joint are most movable? Which type of joint are most movable? And it is, of course, the ball and socket joint, because they can move forwards and backwards and around. So if you think of something like your hip joint, that's a ball and socket joint, and that has got a lot of movement. Please do not move on until you have marked question 7A. Okay, moving on to B. Explain how you move your arm up and then back down again. So this is the kind of question where I'm going to start by putting in my bullet points. I want a minimum of 3 because it's worth 3 marks, so I'm going to put 4 there. And then I'm going to write down the words that I want to include in my answer. So I want to include antagonistic pair, and it's an antagonistic pair of muscles, remember, so I want the word muscles. I want to include relax and contract, because that's what my muscles do. I want to include, probably want to include tendons and ligaments, but not definitely. I'll see how I go. And I think that gets me ready to start. I might just jot down tricep and bicep in case I want to name the muscles. All right, so to move, I'm going to start by talking about moving your arm up, because they've asked to talk about to move your arm up. To move your arm up, your bicep contracts and your tricep relaxes. So I've said that I've linked to the question by saying arm up. I've talked about my bicep and I've said that it contracts. I've talked about my tricep and I've said that it relaxes. So I've got a lot of my keywords in there already. So I've already talked about tricep and bicep, which means I've talked about muscles. I've already used relax and contract. Now I'm going to go straight on to move your arm back down. To move it back down, the tricep contracts and the bicep relaxes. So again, I've referred to the question. I've talked about the muscle contracting, but it's the opposite muscle. I've talked about the opposite muscle relaxing again. So I've used all of those words for a second time. Now, what haven't I spoken about? Well, I've talked about the antagonistic pair, but I haven't used the word. So it'd be great to try and include this word in my next bullet point, seeing as I've got 2 bullet points left that I can fit. So I'm going to put your bicep and tricep are an antagonistic pair of muscles. Oops. Which pull in opposite directions. So I need to say what an antagonistic pair means, and it's mean that they work against one another, they pull in opposite directions. So I've got antagonistic, and I've actually used that word muscles properly now. So there we go. Now I haven't mentioned tendons and ligaments, but I don't really need to get my all 3 marks. I'd say within that I already have all 3 of my marks. However, for people that did mention them, they're definitely worth marks. So you might not have put all of this stuff. You might have talked about tendons and ligaments instead. So what you could have said about tendons and ligaments are, you could have said that the muscles, I keep not spelling muscles right today, the muscles pull on the bones. That's another possible mark that you could have said. You could have said, I'm going to have to put this down here. You could have said the muscles, spelled muscles wrong again, there's a C in there. The muscles are attached to the bones by the tendons. And I'd also probably give you a mark if you put the bones are attached to each other by the ligaments. So, where are your marks then? So let's have a look at where you could possibly pick up each of there's 3 marks, remember. So I would definitely give a mark if you spoke about when you spoke about moving your arm up, if you said that the bicep contracts. I don't think you need to say that the tricep relaxes. I would give you a mark just for saying that the bicep contracts, or for saying that the muscle on top of your arm contracts. Or, of course, I'd definitely give you one if you'd said that one contracts and the other relaxes. So 1 mark for talking about what happens when your arm goes up. Your second mark is for talking about what happens when your arm goes down, i.e. the tricep contracts and the bicep relaxes. So there's your second mark, is for saying that. Then your third mark is your kind of optional mark, where you can have said one of any of these things. So you could either have talked about how they work as an antagonistic pair of muscles. That would be fine. You could also have talked about how muscles pull on the bones. Right, so your third mark could have been for saying the muscles are attached to the bones by the tendons, or it could have been saying the bones are attached to each other by the ligaments. Any of those things would be fine. But what's key is that your first 2 marks need to be talking about the arm going up and the arm going down. Doesn't matter what order they go in, of course. You could have said what happens down first, but it makes more sense up and then down. But anyway, so it has to be a mark for talking about your arm going up. It has to be a mark for your arm going down. And then your third mark is an optional one. It could be any of talking about antagonistic pairs of muscles, could be talking about tendons, could be talking about ligaments. But you obviously need to have said the right thing about them. You can't have said them the wrong way round. You can't have said a irrelevant piece of information about them. Okay, so remember, read carefully through each of your sentences. Really think carefully about whether you got each mark. And hopefully you'll see how using bullet points really helps you make sure that you've got a sentence for each of your marks that it's worth. Please do not move on unless you have completed marking question 7B. Okay, on to question 7C. So you've got a labelled diagram here. It's the same one that I put in your booklet. Fill in the missing words using the diagram to help you. Bones are attached to muscles by tendons. So that's the only possible answer, and it's worth 1 mark. Bones are attached to bones by ligaments. Again, it's the only possible answer. It's really easy to get these round the wrong way, but you don't get the marks if they're round the wrong way, please. You have to have tendons, then ligaments. Something cushions the joints to protect it from impact. So something cushions the joints to protect it from impact. I will allow cartilage or synovial fluid. Synovial fluid is the the better answer, but I will also allow cartilage. And then the last one, something pull on the joints to move them. So that is, of course, muscles. Muscles pull on the joints to move them. So that's a mark out of 4. And that's the end of question 7. So you need to add up all of your marks once again and put them on the front page of the test. Okay? Please do not move on unless you have completed marking question 7, added up all your marks and put them on the front page of the test. Okay, so moving on to the last question, question 8, which isn't so much about the knowledge part of the topic. It's more about the scientific inquiry skills that we've looked at in the topic. So things like fair, accurate, reliable, writing conclusions, knowing what the independent and dependent variables are, etc. Okay? So question 8 is one where I definitely think it would have been really useful to highlight as you read so that you can pick out the information, because there's a lot of info here. Okay, Julie wanted to find out which foods were the best for preventing the disease scurvy. Okay, so I'm going to highlight there. Scurvy causes swollen gums which can lead to your teeth falling out. She devised a set of different diets and tried it out on guinea pigs who had been fed a poor diet to induce scurvy. So all of her guinea pigs have got scurvy to begin with. She fed each group of guinea pigs 3 times a day and gave them each the same mass of food. She recorded their health using a specific set of observations at the end of each day when they had eaten all 3 of their meals. Okay. And then here are her results. So she's got these different diets. So some of them just continued with their poor diet that gave them scurvy in the first place. Some of them went on to a normal diet of wheat pellets, which is what guinea pigs would normally eat. Some of them had their normal diet plus 20 grams of oranges, normal diet plus 20 grams of guava, which is a fruit, another fruit. Normal diet plus 20 grams of tomatoes, which is another fruit, and normal diet plus 20 grams of potato, which is of course a vegetable. And then here are the observations of their health. So these guys got sicker and died because they continued on with their scurvy inducing means causing, by the way, scurvy causing diet. So that actually led them to death. That's why you couldn't do this with people. The ones who had the normal diet of wheat pellets, they actually stayed sick. There were some slight improvements in their health. They didn't die, but they did stay sick. They still had scurvy. Then these guys who had 20 grams of oranges, they recovered after or showed signs of recovery after 4 days, so quite quickly. The ones who had 20 grams of guava, which is a kind of tropical fruit, they actually only took 2 days to start recovering. The ones on tomatoes took 3 days to start recovering. And the ones with potato, they actually did start to recover. So they didn't stay sick like these ones who didn't have any potato. They started to recover after 7 days. So that's a really interesting set of results there. So our first question is 8A, what was their independent variable? So remember, the independent variable is always going to be found up here or here, so it's always going to be a heading in your table, and it's usually the left hand side of your table, and in this case it's the thing you were in charge of changing. So she was in charge of deciding whether they would get a normal diet or a diet with 20 grams of tomatoes, etc. So she was in charge of changing their diet. Okay, so I take the exact heading from there and put it into there. So next part of question A is what was the dependent variable, and it's just going to be the other heading in your table, and we did this in class loads of times. I showed you that it was always the heading of the table. So that's your dependent variable. So the dependent variable is their health. And I'm just going to make sure that I put this specific set of observations, because that's a really good answer to be specific what about their health. However, I will give you the mark if you've got the word health. So you need both those words in the correct order. They can't be round the other way. That means you've got them round the wrong way to get to your marks for A. So please don't move on until you have marked question A. Okay, on to B. Julie used 10 guinea pigs for each of the different diet categories. So if she had 5 different categories, no, she had 6, that means she used 60 guinea pigs. Why does she not just use 1 guinea pig? So why didn't she have 1 with each diet? Well, it wouldn't have been reliable. If your 1 guinea pig had got better or your 1 guinea pig had died, that wouldn't be enough to prove anything. In order to prove it, you need your results to be reliable. You need a good sample size. It would be even more reliable if she'd used 100 guinea pigs. I still don't think 10 guinea pigs is really enough, but it makes it more reliable. So the key word I'm looking for is reliable. You can have it in a sentence or you can have it on its own. I will allow it if you just wrote the word reliable. How did Julie make her observations more accurate? So accuracy is to do with measuring, and she said that she had a specific set of observations. So when you're talking about how healthy they are, that could be something quite subjective, something quite vague without a specific answer, but she's looking at a specific set of observations in order to see that they are recovering or staying sick. So I would put in here, she used a specific set of observations. And I don't really think that there's another way that you could have said that. I think you need to use the words that she said. If you feel like you have said this in a slightly different way, then obviously you can get the mark, but I do think you probably need to use her phrase here. Okay, on to the next bit of part B. Why did Julie have a group of guinea pigs on the poor diet still? Well, it's this thing of comparison again. She needs to see what would have happened if they'd have stayed on that diet. Because she can't really say that doing this is what caused them to get better if she didn't keep them on this poor diet, because they might have just got better all on their own. She doesn't know that unless she proves that they would get sicker and die. So she needs to have a comparison is a good answer. If you put as a control as a control group, that's a good answer. If you put to prove her evidence, that would be an acceptable answer. So anything that talks about the fact that she's comparing what would have happened, or she's proving what would have happened, or it's her control group, any of those answers are acceptable. Okay, and then the last part of question B, what did Julie do to make sure her test was fair? So this is what things she kept the same in order to make it fair. And that's where my highlighting comes into play here. So she fed each of her groups of guinea pigs 3 times a day. What else did I highlight? They have the same mass of food. She took her observations at the end of each day, because it wouldn't have been fair. Imagine if she'd have observed one group in the morning before they'd had their food, which is obviously helping them get better, and then the other group she looked at the end of the day, they'd have had 3 extra meals to help them get better. So they'd actually have had essentially a day extra. She wouldn't be doing it if she wasn't doing it at the same time. So it's really important that she does it at the end of each day. And they don't talk about anything else in here that she did to keep it the same. So if you wrote anything else, you were making that up. You were assuming that yourself rather than taking it from the information. So this really is a comprehension in many ways. So it's 3 times a day, it's the mass of food, and it's the end of each day to observe. Those are the only 3 options that are available to you. So yeah, this kind of question is a lot of comprehension, really. You have to understand the science behind it, but you have to be able to pick out the information they've given you, which is why highlighting is so important. Please don't move on until you have marked question 8B. Okay, and let's go on to then the last question, which is part C. Which food was the best source of vitamin C? Use evidence to prove your answer. So we need to go to our table and we need to look at who recovered the quickest. So if we look at the recovery days, the quickest one is 2 days, which is guava. So even if you didn't know what guava was, it shouldn't have mattered because it tells you that they recovered after, or started recovering after 2 days. So most people would expect it to be oranges, but that took 4 days. It's actually behind tomatoes. Tomatoes was even better than oranges as well. So the best food was guava. And that doesn't get you the mark because it says use evidence to prove your answer. So you have to say, because recovery started after 2 days, or you could say the least amount of time. It was the quickest recovery. Anything that refers to the fact that guava worked the quickest, the fastest, was the least amount of time. I've put the specific number of days. You could have said less days than anyone else. Anything where you're actually using evidence from the table is totally acceptable, okay? And so that is you done with the test. So you can add up all of your marks from this question, put it onto the front page, and then we'll look at what to do next. Please don't move on unless you have completed marking your test. Okay, so your job is to add up these numbers. Obviously yours will be different to mine. I've just made mine up. You're going to add these up and then you're going to put the answer here. So you need to use a calculator to make sure that you've added these up properly, okay? So pause the video, add up your numbers and put them here. Okay, so if I've added mine up, I've got 71, okay, out of 91. So I'm going to show you how to work out what percentage you got using that. So you're going to do your mark. So mine is 71, but you would do your mark. Let's say you got 60, you'd put 60. Let's say you got 82, you'd put 82. So your mark over 91. I might put your mark in brackets here just so you really don't get confused. So your mark over 91, you press equals and you'll get a result that will probably be it will be 0 point something, okay? Let's just pretend it was 0.835, and then you times that by 100 and that will give you your percentage. So if I times mine by 100, it will be that. So you do your mark, you divide it by 91, you press equals, you'll get a number in decimals. You times that number in decimals by 100 to get your percentage, okay? Then when you've got your percentage, could you write it up here for me like that, okay? And then what I want you to do is you're going to take a photograph of this, and post it, okay, into this lesson. So you just upload it straight into this lesson. And it needs to be a photograph where I can read this number. If I'm not going to be able to read this number, then it's no use, okay? Don't worry, nobody else will be able to see what you've got. Only I can access these photos, okay, guys? Okay, so the last thing that you're going to do, which you probably would only have 10 minutes for, and only do this if you have 10 minutes left. Do not worry at all, it's optional. But what you're going to do if you have time is you're going to have a look at this, what I did well and what I need to improve on. And what you would do is have a look at a question. So for example, let's look at question 1. The first part of question 1, I got all of the knowledge part right. So I would say that my knowledge on question 1 was good and I would tick it. Then I would have a look at other parts of the question and I'd go, oh, actually, let's say maybe for the question about the data table, I found that really difficult. I didn't highlight what I needed in the table. I didn't talk about the numbers in my answers. So I'm not very good at referring to my data table. So I would put what I need to improve on, I would tick that. Then let's say I went on to look at my method and I thought, oh, I got all my marks in the method. I wrote a really nice clear method, I'd tick that. So you basically go through the list of things, look at them and work out whether you did them well or you need to improve on them. If you're not sure what application and deduction mean, I did talk about it in the video, but applying means if there's a question where you have to apply knowledge that you have to work out the answer. So it goes hand in hand with deduction, which means to work out what an answer is. So it's for those questions which aren't just remember this fact, they're like, oh, work this out kind of questions, okay? So, but if you need to leave those two out completely, that's totally fine. So go through as many as you have time for, because it's really helpful to see what you're good at and what you need to work on. And you might look back and see, oh, well, there's a pattern actually. All my knowledge was great, but I really need to learn how to write a method properly. You know, it will help you see things like that. It will be different for everybody, of course, okay? If you do this part, I'd love to see a picture of this as well as just your result. I'd love to see what you kind of assessed yourself as being good at and what you need to improve on. So as I say, this is totally optional if you have time at the end.